If you're Israel and you're trying to influence American policy, it would actually probably behoove you to largely blackmail Democrats, because Democrats are the ones that, at least in turn, they posture anyway, of being more sympathetic to Palestinians than Republicans.
The controversy surrounding the Trump state visit to the UK, especially the public display of a photograph featuring Trump and Jeffrey Epstein, directly ties into Webb's ongoing investigative focus. Webb has repeatedly discussed the enduring influence of the Epstein network, its connections to intelligence agencies, including Mossad and the CIA, and the lack of accountability for high-profile individuals. She has specifically highlighted how figures like Trump, Leslie Wexner, and others remain shielded from scrutiny, and how the Epstein case is deeply intertwined with both American and Israeli intelligence operations.
Maxwell dies in 91, and that's the first year that Ghislaine and Epstein are, seen out publicly dating. But Epstein had several girlfriends in this period. And he took many of them on his Clinton White House visits, which began in 1993. The first one was Robert Rubin that was inviting him. But his deputy was Larry Summers, who, as we all know now, had a very cozy Epstein relationship. And, Robert Rubin and the repeal of Glass-Steagall, it was... Rubin had left to go work for Sandy Weill, and that's the reason why Glass-Steagall had to go away, so that Citigroup could merge.
That was a Clinton policy, right?
Well, the repeal of it, yeah. Larry Summers was also a Treasury Secretary under Clinton. But at the time Rubin effected that Epstein visit, he wasn't Treasury Secretary yet, because I believe Clinton had 3 Treasury Secretaries, Rubin and Summers being the latter 2. The first one was Lloyd Benson. And so at that time, Rubin was head of the National Economic Council. But he had previously been head of one of the top people at Goldman Sachs. And Goldman Sachs was one of the main banks involved in Robert Maxwell's funny money stuff involving the pension funds. Ari Ben Menashe, who I mentioned earlier, said that his understanding was that the sexual blackmail stuff of Epstein was done for Israel with the purpose of blackmailing Bill Clinton. And a lot of the other politicians that are, accused by Epstein, prominent Epstein accusers, or otherwise named in documents, things like that, are people like Bill Richardson or George Mitchell. They're both Democrats. So if you're Israel and you're trying to influence American policy, it would actually probably behoove you to largely blackmail Democrats, because Democrats are the ones that, at least in turn, they posture anyway, of being more sympathetic to Palestinians than Republicans. So you don't really need to blackmail Republicans to take your side when it comes to negotiations related to the Israel-Palestine conflict. And what's interesting is, there's a couple other figures that ended up having unusual relationships with Epstein that were related to some of those big agreements between Israel and Palestine during the Clinton era. So one of them was later on head of the International Peace Institute, which Epstein donated a lot of money to. But he also gave personal loans and other things to this guy who had to step down. His name, I think, was, I don't know how to pronounce it, but his last name was Rod Larson. And he was one of the lead negotiators on the Oslo Peace Accords in the early 90s. As an example. And George Mitchell was known as a negotiator involved in this kind of stuff too. So it seems like a lot of targeting was kind of done there. And also allegedly there's been a lot of work done. I forget the journalist's name, David Harbour, I think it is. Anyway, he went over tons of documents and other things and basically showed that the Monica Lewinsky thing, Israel knew about it first, and that there was a lot of pressing of Clinton on that point by Netanyahu to get something more favorable for Israel. During negotiations then. And also you have figures like Ehud Barak and another member of the aforementioned mega group, Michael Steinhardt, being instrumental in pressuring Clinton to pardon Mark Rich in the final days of his time as president. It was one of those very last-minute pardons that are usually pretty controversial. And Clinton's not the only one to do that. Trump has done some of them, and pretty much every recent president has controversial pardons made at the last moment, like Biden's, were Fauci and his own family and things like that. So it's become, unfortunately, a pretty common practice. But Ehud Barak was, is reported to have screamed at Clinton about pardoning Mark Rich. So, former prime minister and defense minister of Israel screaming at the U.S. president, telling him what to do, and then he does it. Interesting. It's important to point out, though, that Mark Rich, he was a commodities guy, and he was a fugitive from the U.S. for a long time because he disobeyed U.S. sanctions and was selling, oil, or engaged in commodity sales to basically benefit Israel. But was engaging in transactions with Iran and other companies that were, on the naughty list of the U.S. government at the time. But he was a very well-known and it's very well-documented asset of Mossad and Israeli intelligence, and had a lot of overlap with that. And a lot of people that worked for him were on Israeli intelligence payroll. And he also had a lot of, his company, Glencore, I believe now is Nathaniel Rothschild is one of the main people there and has been for some time. So he's, the new head of the British Rothschild branch.
From a recent headline from the New York Times, a $15 billion defamation lawsuit has been filed against the New York Times by Donald Trump, with accusations that the paper's coverage caused significant harm to his reputation. This high-stakes legal battle is sparking new debates about the power dynamics between politicians, the press, and the courts. President Trump's state visit to the UK is making headlines, not just for diplomatic reasons, but also because of the controversy surrounding a public display featuring him and Jeffrey Epstein near Windsor Castle, reminding the world of lingering questions about elite ties and accountability. America's Secretary of State Marco Rubio has issued a stark warning that time is running out for a deal to end the war in Gaza, reflecting the urgent global focus on the Israeli-Palestinian crisis and the mounting pressure for a ceasefire. These headlines not only echo the power plays and intelligence games Whitney Webb has exposed, they also show how the same networks and strategies remain at the heart of today's biggest news stories.
Tidbits. This will be a first in many ways. The British government is saying that the scale and spectacle of the military ceremonial is going to be unprecedented. This will be the largest military ceremonial welcome for a state visit to the UK in living memory, they say. And there are a couple of firsts that we're going to see here over the next little while. They say this is the first time there has been a joint UK-US military, what they call fly past, what we call a flyover, at a state visit. So American and British pilots flying together in solidarity. That shows the specialness of that special relationship, as you guys have been discussing. Windsor is going to see the largest guard of honor ever at a state visit to the UK, and this is the first time they say that beating retreat has been performed at a state visit, and a U.S. military band will take place in the changing of the guard at Buckingham Palace later this month for the first time in history. So all of that symbolism designed to show how close the relationship is between these two countries when, as you guys were just discussing, the relationship in the real world is a little bit frayed.